Hello, this video is going to be about my findings with the SimuCube direct drive system with a small Meech after approximately 1 year of ownership. In this video I'm going to talk about my force feedback settings and how they have evolved over time and the reasoning behind it. But first let's start with the beginning. I come from a Logitech G25 and then I moved over to a Fanatec Club Sport Wheel V1 and then eventually I got a small Meech. And because you're used to those consumer wheels, which are way too weak to even produce the proper force feedback that the game is sending, you're using settings to get as much detail as possible. So I always use no damping just to get the most fidelity and quickness out of the wheel because they were too slow and too weak to reproduce the exact force feedback signal. But now when you get a direct drive wheel which can reproduce the exact signal, it raises a certain amount of problems. This is iRacing with the SimuCube direct drive wheel. Basically everything is turned off, no filtering, no damping at all. I want to show you this, just to show you how bad the signal really is from the game. It's really crude. The turning I did in the pits when standing still, it's basically you literally hear and feel the 60 Hz signal. And yeah, that's not realistic at all. And when you drive on the straight, even the small bumps in the track, they are like really spiky signals. I will show a picture of the force feedback signal just after this, and you'll see everything you hear, all the jittering, all the spikes. You can almost basically literally see and hear the signal, and you really feel it in your wheel. It's not pleasant at all. It's like really geary and sandy, mostly geary. And this basically shows how much filtering is going on with all the other consumer wheels. The force feedback without filtering is not really something you want to drive with. It's like undrivable. It's horrible. This is an example of the force feedback signal from telemetry. This should be what the wheel gets from the game. You can see it's real jittery. It's almost the same as in the video. It's a reproduction of the sound you hear and what you feel. It's way too raw and spiky. It doesn't feel realistic at all. It really needs a lot of filtering to even feel like a normal. And to fix this problem, you really have to use a lot of filtering. I'm using Reconstruction Filter 8 here. I've done huge amounts of testing of all of them, but basically you can still feel the jittery signal in Archon 127. You don't hear it like in the Aircon 0 video I showed you, but you definitely feel it in the wheel. All the way up till 7 you can still feel the 60 Hz gear. It feels like a gear, the signal. When you turn the wheel left and right you can literally feel the signal. And only when you reach Archon 8, that's where it really starts to disappear. And the bumps in the road surfers, they finally start to feel as little bumps instead of like literally a notch you feel in the wheel just as you see the signal. What you see is what you get, that's how it feels. And that's really not what you want. Some people really use a low reconstruction filter like 125, but the signal is way too bad for that. You will keep feeling all the spikes. You really don't want that. They do this because they think it adds lag. And me and some very sensitive friends have tested it, and it has no adverse effect on driving or lap times or catching slides. And now the second part of the problem. Because you were used to like the low torque consumer wheels where you didn't use any damping at all, and even with those weak wheels you have like oscillation like this. But with the power and strength and quickness of a direct drive wheel, it becomes a problem because it's so strong it can hurt you. And it has also some other problems. When you drive over curbs, the kick and the strength is way too strong. You can't even probably go over curbs. The wheel actually kicks so hard that it messes with your steering inputs and stability of the car. It actually even makes you slow. And here you have the example with the new settings. You can see it drives so much smoother. You can even take your hands off the wheel. You can even turn the wheel a bit and it will not start to oscillate like crazy. So you have a lot more control and correct feeling over the car because of the oscillations. Even when you go over curbs and overshoot of the signal, you get wrong information and even corrections. You can start to correct things that are not really there because of the wrong feedback you get. And with these damping settings, it's actually a lot more livable to drive with higher strength force feedback. With no damping at all, if you run high forces, it's way too hard on the curbs. And even with the damping, you don't have to be afraid that you don't feel them anymore. They are still plenty strong, but you have a lot less problems with kick in the steering wheel, so you have better control over the car. And those damping and friction and inertia settings, they take care of another problem. A direct drive wheel with like a small meat servo motor. It runs so smooth, it's like an axis on a free-flowing bearing. There's no mass to it at all. So even when you drive in game with the force feedback and you have no damping, there's not enough mass of the steering rack and tires. It's actually way too easy to turn the wheel, so you get too quick steering inputs, but those damping settings help with that problem. But it's probably difficult to see in a video, but it gives a more realistic mass to the wheel, and it also helps with driving in general and with the crude force feedback signal, and also with the spikes in the... I hope this information gives you some new insights into the force feedback settings and the force feedback from the game and how it works with the wheel. And I hope you guys try out these settings. They are really a game changer. If you drive for this with a while and then go back, it's insanely horrible if you drive with a lower recon filter. But I really strongly advise these settings now as a new baseline for you guys to go from. And another few last things I want to mention. Why don't I use a Archon 9 or 10? 8 is such a big step from 7 to 8. 7 still you can feel the gears in the wheel. 8 really is the first setting where the force feedback really starts to feel smooth. And the reason I don't use 9 or 10 is because they produce more overshoot and more oscillation. And with 1% damping, the signal is smoothed out, so it feels just as good as 9 and 10 without the drawbacks. Another few thoughts about the friction, inertia and damping. In my opinion, you want to use as least amount of damping as possible. If you have like a high amount of dampening, it really starts to work the motor, and you can feel that. It's better to add more inertia if you want it more damped, and it also depends on the motor you use. If you use a big meach instead of a small meach, but I advise keep the damping on 1%. On a big meach you might want to use a tiny bit less friction, and depending on the track and car you might want to adjust the inertia, but 4 is a good starting point. I use 3 on some tracks, but the Nordschleife is really bumpy and extreme. You really need the inertia there. And of course everyone is free to experiment and improve upon these settings, but I think it's a really good baseline, and I hope you guys try it and enjoy it and hopefully leave some feedback. Thank you for watching, and bye bye.